so let's go ahead and get started. So, hi, my name is Lauren Cason, and I am a senior artist at ustwo Games, where we recently shipped Monument Valley 2. I've been working in the industry for about 6 years. Here I am at the end of art school, I think days before I got offered my first internship, and here I am last year. I've been changing my hair pretty regularly, but obviously some things never change. And my career, I'm sure like many of yours, has been really all over the place. I got my start working in AAA and free-to-play. So I was on really big teams with a lot of structure. My first job was actually 38. Are there any 38ers in the room? Anybody remember that? Yeah, hey, yeah. And as a young junior artist at these bigger studios, the problems that I had to solve were always really well defined for me by someone else. So draw a cute giraffe, or render these materials, or make a really cool helicopter. But about 3 years ago, I went from mostly working on really big teams, where my role was really well defined and I was always tasked by somebody else, to much smaller teams on games like Luna, Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, and Monument Valley 2, which I was really excited about. My heart really lies with these sorts of experimental, emotional games, and honestly, I felt so lucky that these smaller studios took a chance on me. But I really wasn't prepared for how, though my ability to make things and render and having the craft of being a game artist was really important, a large part of my job was gonna be so different from the kind of problem solving that I was used to. It was stuff like, how do you make a VR hand that doesn't make people want to hit? Or what should that be? And honestly, I sucked. I sucked at answering these questions at the beginning. There's that word concept artist, and concepts and problem solving had just become a much bigger part of my job title, and I was finding it super hard. I found myself doing stuff like throwing pages and pages of color keys at problems that probably needed a really different approach. Or just iterating as fast as I could on stuff without thinking about why I was iterating on that particular idea in the first place. And I think for a lot of us, this is a really emotionally difficult thing to admit that you're having trouble with. I know that I found it much easier to say to my art director, hey, you know, I don't know how to bake this kind of light map, than, hey, I'm having a really hard time coming up with ideas, and I don't feel like I have strategies for it. I think we look at this kind of creativity as something that's innate to people, and not something that can be learned or improved on, that people are just born with it. But that's a false narrative that I think I've heard before, that artists are born with talent. And I think most artists in this room will tell you that that is not really true. Talent is kind of a myth. Artists are good artists because they practiced. It's your love of a thing, and it is the hours that you have put in. So this roach was actually one of my first portfolio pieces that I submitted to studios, and this was definitely the best thing in there. There was a lot worse, and I unfortunately couldn't find the rest of it. But I was not that good. People would not have said that I was talented. In fact, art directors specifically told me that I wasn't when I went to portfolio reviews. But I put in the hours, and I got better. And I'm pretty sure that this whole creative thinking, inspiration stuff is probably pretty similar, that we have a broken narrative, and it's something you can get better at. It's just a question of where you put that time. And that's what this talk is gonna be about. It's where can you put that time to improve at this pretty nebulous concept? I'm definitely still figuring this stuff out. I don't have all the answers. But I'm going to share with you some processes that I have found really useful, and some things that I incorporate into my daily routine that have really helped me with expanding my own creativity. And at the end of the talk, I'll actually walk you through how we built a Monument Valley 2 level and how we incorporated a lot of these processes into that. And a caveat, as far as inspiration goes, I am not here to tell you one cool trick to pull your hat or pull out of your hat during difficult brainstorming sessions. This isn't about cool tricks. Game devs don't hate me, maybe my ex, but that's a different story. The things I want to talk about are less one cool trick. They're more like going to the gym or keeping a sketchbook. It's stuff that you make a habit of. And if you can integrate it into your routines, you will see change and you will see improvement. So the first thing that I want to talk about is something called open mode. It comes from this talk that John Cleese of Monty Python gave called How to Be Creative. It's pretty easy to find. Just Google John Cleese creativity talk. Now, I'm slightly remiss to recommend it because he makes some pretty questionable jokes about women's liberation and Eastern Europeans, but it's an old talk, and we're going to pull some of the good nuggets out because I think the way he verbalizes this idea is really, really good. So he talks about us having two sorts of creative modes. You've got open mode and you have closed mode. So closed mode is the sort of getting stuff done mode. It's emails, it's blasting through your Jira tickets, it's putting on your headphones and doing some really, really careful rendering all day. And I think a lot of us are the most comfortable in closed mode. I know that I certainly was. This, I was realizing, was probably where I had spent most of my artistic career. And then there's open mode. Open mode is the more, quote unquote, creative mode. It's more contemplative, it's more inclined to humor, it's more playful, and this is the space where a lot of our best ideas come from. It's where a lot of our problem solving happens, and it's where we find a lot of our inspiration. So I saw this talk and I was like, okay, great, I just need to do what the Monty Python guy says and get myself in open mode. So you set time tide, you go to a quiet room, you get your sketchbook, and I was like, cool, open mode, gonna do it. But you sit down and you're like, oh yeah, you know what, I had those emails that I needed to reply to. I forgot to check that file in. I should probably do that. What about that thing that Stacy said this morning? That was really weird. I'm just gonna check Twitter really quick. Oh no, I'm supposed to be in open mode right now. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing, this is useless, I'm useless. So if that train of thought sounds familiar to any of you, then the first strategy that I'm actually gonna recommend is mindfulness. I'm not saying that you should be doing it while you're trying to come up with ideas, but I find that having a daily practice with this really helps me because it trains some pretty specific things that make it much easier to stay in that open, creative, useful space. But what actually is mindfulness? I feel like I've been hearing it in a lot of talks, but nobody's quite explained it. It's a big concept, but in short, it's kind of a simple form of meditation. It involves stuff like focusing on your breath and body awareness. I personally use Headspace, but there's a lot of other cool apps and books and stuff out there, and it's helped me in some pretty specific ways. So the first is I found it helps with bringing your mind back to the problem at hand. When you are blue sky thinking, it's so easy to get off topic or to forget what you were supposed to be doing in the first place, and it helps train that focus. But more importantly, it helps stop that voice in your head that gets mad at you for getting distracted in the first place. The second is, honestly, it can be really boring, but there's a lot of studies that show that boredom is actually really, really good for creativity, and getting more comfortable with being bored can be really helpful. And learning to sit with discomfort and anxiety. Now, I don't necessarily mean about your life, though that's great too. I mean more that this open mode is more uncomfortable than closed. It feels better to go with the first idea that you have and to start drilling in rather than staying in that space of, I don't know, and I'm thinking about it. But often your best ideas are not your first ones. They're the ones that you get to when you've been letting your mind sit up against that discomfort. And if you can't stay in that uncomfortable space, you're not gonna get to them. So on a sort of similar note, I would really recommend getting off the internet on days that you know you're gonna be solving these sorts of difficult problems. Maybe some of you have a healthier relationship to social media than I do, but I know that the first thing that I do when I'm uncomfortable or I'm unsure is I tend to grab for Facebook or social media or Reddit or whatever. It's become a mental security blanket for a lot of us. And I find that this sort of scrolling really, really hinders me. I think, going back to a previous point, because it means I never really have to be bored, I never really have to be uncomfortable. So I personally use an app called Zero Willpower. It blocks a list of websites and apps on my phone for myself, and a browser extension called Stay Focused. So I know that, hey, if today is a brainstorming day at work, before I get there in the morning, I hit the button on both of these apps. So I cannot be scrolling Twitter, not even in the bathroom, because, hey, maybe sitting on the toilet is when you would have been making those really valuable connections in your brain. So that's the first strategy then, is mindfulness and getting off the internet. What is the next thing that you might want to work on? Randomness. So working on your ability to come up with random things, to follow seemingly stupid lines of thought and make irrelevant connections and leaps will really greatly serve you, especially when it comes to things like brainstorming and mind mapping. Introducing an element of randomness has been serving humanity for a very long time. And my personal favorite examples are usually from divination, particularly something called scapulomancy. So in a few cultures around the world, particularly in a few ancient communities in North America, people used to take a scapula before going on a hunt, and they would burn it. And then they would use the cracks in that scapula that formed from the heat as a map of the area. And they would follow the lines to figure out where they were going to go hunt that day. So scapulomancy was a great early random number generator that meant people didn't end up going hunting in the same area all the time. It mixed things up, and it helped make sure that they struck out into new areas. And introducing your own kinds of randomness into your process and even ritual can really help you strike out into new areas. So to provide a couple more divination examples, because I think they're really fun, an old one is Bible dipping. I grew up in the Bible Belt of Texas, so we used to do this as kids, but you can do it with books of poetry, or Sandman comics, or whatever you want. So you open a book to a random page, and you point at a line. How does that apply to your current problem? Point at another. How do you meld the two? What game could that be? Another personal favorite here is tarot. I've been reading tarot for about 5 years, and it is my absolute favorite two-player branching narrative game that gives me my best ideas. Pull 3 cards. What story did those 3 things tell? Put them in a different order. What does it tell now? So if this all seems a little bit witchy and woo-woo to all of you, and maybe a little bit irrelevant, we kind of already do this. I know that a lot of us have turned to Jesse Schell's deck of lenses to get ideas brewing. And it's a lot of the same principles. So much of this pulls from divination. And if you want some really wonderful rituals for introducing randomness into your process, I would really highly recommend doing some research on divination methods. My coworker Joel, this is Joel, took some similar approaches in the early stages of Monument Valley 2, but with podcasts instead of cards. So Joel is a game designer, and he had to come up with a ton of puzzles per week. So every time that there was a 99% Invisible episode that would come out, he would try to come up with a Monument Valley puzzle that was based on that subject matter. So you can do this with really anything, whatever works for you. If it's cloud shapes, if it's bird flight patterns, if it's podcast, if it's the thing that reached the top of Reddit, whatever works. There's another really easy and fun way to get started being better at being random is a Japanese word game called shiratori. So you say a word, you take the last letter of that word, and you come up with a word that starts with it, and so on and so on. So for example, you could have cat ends with T, toe ends with E, escalator. What would that game be? Or lipstick, kibble, elephant. Another favorite of mine is Wikipedia's random page generator. So this landed me on a page about a Welshman in the 50s who lived in Sweden but was a karate master, which sounds like a pretty cool game to me. Or maybe you land on a page about kinetic energy. How can you apply that to the problem that you're trying to solve? And when you're playing these games, understand that a lot of it is going to be a strikeout. That's okay. There is probably nothing to cat-toe escalators. Maybe kinetic energy is not going to be the answer this time. But playing with these concepts is going to do a lot to expand your thinking and your methods of problem solving. And speaking of play, a lot of what I've been describing is play, which is great. Games are play. I think we like play. And play is a really good mindset to be in when you're trying to find inspiration. Play is in that open space that we talked about earlier. And if I'm getting frustrated, a lot of times I will play some rounds of shiratori. I'll play with my tarot cards. It puts you in a much better mind space than blowing off steam on Facebook or trying to force yourself to have a cool idea. And also speaking of play is often best when you invite others. But only if you play nice, if you're fostering psychological safety. If the people that you invite in make you feel defensive or unsafe, it shuts down that creative process. There's a lot of research that supports this. Google had that really cool study about psychological safety that I'm sure a lot of you saw. You also want to do what you can to be somebody who also plays nice, who is supportive, and who keeps other people's ideas rolling. And if that's something that you want to get better at, I would recommend trying improv. Now, I don't personally do improv, but I do something that stretches a lot of the same muscles and has similarly devout followers, which is partner dancing. So both of these things help you with building on other people's ideas, going with the flow, reacting in the moment, all of which is going to make you a better teammate and a better brainstorming partner and probably overall cool human. Now, there's a particular principle from improv that I want to talk about, and that's yes and. The general idea being, if somebody says something to you, you cannot say no during the sketch. You have to say yes, and it was a cat, or something like that. This is a really, really, really great thing to bring with you when you are working on ideation. It really helps keep people engaged, it helps promote safety, and it helps keep things moving. So the last strategy I have got for you is objective description. So what exactly does that mean? A good way of breaking it down would be, say, taking the puzzle, or the level, or the problem, or the behavior that you're stuck on, and describe it as if you were telling someone about it over the phone, someone who had never seen it before. This is actually a strategy that I learned from a mentor of mine, Jeff Hesser, back when I was in university. He's given some really, really good GDC talks where he goes way more into depth on this, so I would highly recommend checking those out. So let's look at an example with a Rubik's Cube. How would we describe a Rubik's Cube? We can say, it's a cube. It's made of black plastic. It's got 26 smaller cubes. Each side of the cube has 26 faces, 9 faces. They can be white, green, yellow, red, or blue. You can twist it along certain axes. It's about 4 by 4 inches. It makes a clicky sound when you play with it. So what's the point of this exercise? If you're stuck, if you're trying to design around a problem with a Rubik's Cube, you've already been looking at it for a while. You probably know intuitively that this thing is made of black plastic. So I find it really helps you find the details and things that you didn't see before. Things that maybe you've already spent a lot of time looking at. I've often been surprised by how much about a puzzle or a problem I didn't notice before going through this process of verbalizing a description to myself. It really helps you find those pieces of information that might have seemed irrelevant, but are often really key to the problem at hand. And this list can be helpful in a lot of different ways. So let's look at how we use this method on Monument Valley 2. So I'm actually going to take you through the whole process of creating art for this particular level from start to finish, and you'll see a lot of the principles that I talked about at play. So the process for level design was we would get a puzzle from a designer, and then the artist would have to figure out what it looked like. With the art direction, at least at the beginning, usually starting with the very open, make it look cool. And there's a billion directions that you could take this in. But by going through that process of describing the puzzle, we can narrow that possibility space in a meaningful way and find some things that maybe we hadn't considered before. So how would I describe this puzzle? It is vertical. It has 3 structures. It has turrets. It's layered. The top of structures can move. They rotate, they teleport, and they repeat. So once I have this list of words that I think objectively describes the puzzle, I'll pull out the ones that I think are the most important. In this case, we had rotation, repeated elements, and layers. I'll write that down, and anything I can think of related to those words, trying to keep my mind in that open mode. And gathering reference, anything goes. And this is where having done those randomness exercises with stuff like Shiratori can really help you. You'll find that the possibility space that you go to becomes so much larger when you've been doing stuff like that regularly. So what did we end up with for reference? For layers, we ended up with references like Fordite and licorice and exploded views. For repetition, we had a lot of food. We looked at Wayne Thiebaud and shop displays. And for rotation, we had Ferris wheels, spinning tops, music boxes. And we gather all of that into a Pinterest board to start with usually. But after that, we almost always ended up printing things out and moving to a physical board. So we have a real culture at ustwo around these boards and printing things out in general. We're always printing everything and sticking it up on our walls and on foam core. We actually printed out the entire game and we have it on a wall at the studio, and it helps us make decisions about things like color. Is there too much pink in this part of the game? Is it too dark here when we're trying to tell a narrative that's light? It's much easier to glance across a wall and understand these things than it is to click through JPEGs. And you end up with insights that you do not see without seeing the whole. The same goes for the boards. You end up seeing patterns that you didn't see when it was digital and on a Pinterest board. For this board in particular, one of the things that popped out that I didn't see before was a color scheme. It was this warm pale pink, it was a turquoise blue, and yellow with accents of black that kept coming out. I like having them around too because I'm someone who stares off into space a lot, and I cannot tell you how many times just having my reference material in my line of vision when I was staring off into space instead of a JPEG on my desktop ended up inspiring a solution. They're also really great to have around if you have a really important visitor to the studio and you need to quickly walk them through the project. And speaking of playing with others earlier, it invites other people to take part. The programmer who sits on the other side of the office probably isn't going to go surfing through my Pinterest boards, even if I've opened it to them. But if they're surfing by my desk and they see something that piques their interest or something that they have knowledge about, it might start a dialogue. It invites conversation, it invites collaboration, and invites other people's insights. So back to the level. These were the sketches that we liked the most in the end, and we usually kept it pretty rough. And you can see the influence of the references here. The licorice, the layers, Wayne Thiebaud's repetition. They're all chosen because they in some way related specifically to the mechanics that we broke down by objective description. And this was the final result. And there's a lot of these principles that we talked about that went into making this level and other levels of Monument Valley too. There was objective description, there was random word association, there was bringing other people in, and things like having a practice of meditation and some easy to impose internet restrictions also helped. So that wraps up the talk. What are our takeaways here? How do you work this muscle? How do you get better at ideation and inspiration? So first, keep this idea of open mode and closed mode in the back of your head. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend checking out that John Cleese talk. Are you going into closed mode too quickly because it's easier? Try out mindfulness. It might help you get into a better headspace for ideation. I know that it certainly helped me. Practice objectively describing things. It will help you find that seemingly irrelevant information that could be the answer to your problem and help you come up with more elegant design solutions. Practice being random. It will make you better at brainstorming and creating new and interesting connections. Try stuff like shiratori, try word games, try divination. Play with others. If I learned anything at Zynga, it is that everything is better with friends. And remember to play nice and play safe. Try something improvised. Remember to yes and. Use physical things when possible. It helps invite others to come play too. And I think most importantly, remember that you can get better at this. If you are feeling uninspired or like you are not very creative, it does not mean that there is something innately wrong with you or that you are untalented or that you are bad. You are not a hack. I think that is a story that a lot of us tell ourselves about creativity and inspiration that is just not helpful. If you find this stuff hard, it just means it's a muscle that you haven't been working, and I promise you, you can get better at it. And that's it. I believe in you guys, and you have totally got this. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, great talk.
Thank
really
you.
Enjoyed it. I also seen that creative talk that John Cleese did, and I think it's really good. I think he talked about when he does those kind of those creative clearing your mind spaces. It's like a 2-hour process or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you take those kind of sessions yourself, or do you kind of find that you have kind of grown out of that at least?
So at ustwo, we do tend to like time box brainstorming sessions that I think are sort of open mode. But yeah, I think we do like have specific times that are for this.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. No? Okay. Oh. No. All right, thank you.